the methodology and approaches are different. And the methodology employed by phenomenology and Vedanta are altogether different. So what I'm trying to bring to your notice is methodology is important as we approach in understanding the nature of consciousness. In the absence of the grasp of the methodology, the conclusions obviously differ. You employ one method, you would arrive at certain conclusions, and you cannot contradict those conclusions which are arrived at using certain method by some other conclusions which you have arrived by using some other method. That's where the problem lies. You arrive at certain conclusions because you are employing a certain method, which takes you to a certain distance in philosophical investigations. That's the methodology. And next. The one question that generally Vedantic thinkers start by discussing is, do we know anything about subjectivity at all? That's a famous question raised by the Bhamatikara Vachaspati Mishra. Of his Anad Bhavati Purusha. Man is the last thing in creation for the Vedanta. He's the last. And therefore, that subjectivism is throwing too many words or concepts. I'll stop there and get back to this whole idea. We'll stick to the two birds story for today. 2 lions, 2 birds, and then and we will end with 4 birds instead of 2. That's how this journey. Let's not enter into so many areas which Vedanta deals with, which is not good to do. So let's stick with this. Next, please. Consciousness is the subjectivity having no relation with any object. It's a trans-empirical, trans-relational, and therefore disembodied. As I said, today at least, we are not indulging in arguing as to how did you arrive at this statement. That needs to be argued as such. It's not mere assumption, but that needs a lot of work to say that it is trans-relational, trans-empirical, and disembodied. That work needs to be done. It means that there is a dichotomy between consciousness as subjectivity and the world of objects presented to it. However, there is the involvement of consciousness in the objects of the world. Consciousness becomes worldly, therefore, the pleasures and pains. Consciousness, as it gets reflected in Antahkarana, it becomes the empirical ego. And the definition from Vedanta Paribhasha is Antahkarana Avachinna Chaitanya as Jiva Chaitanya. Delimited by the Antahkarana is the empirical ego, the bird that you have seen, which is eating the bitter sweet fruits, and all the layers of identities that we have acquired by cultural context, by religious affiliation, by education, by social fabric. All those identities and the kind of evolution of the ego that we have pertains to the empirical ego for the Vedantins. We will see what J. Krishnamurti has got to say. That's the problematic. Till now we are trying to understand what the problem for the Vedantins is. How did the pure Sakshi Chaitanya, the other bird, which is the onlooker, spectator ego, that's a beautiful phrase from Husserl, spectator ego, which is a transcendental subjectivity. By the time he enters into ideas 2, in ideas 1, you don't have a clear exposition of transcendental subjectivity, but he does it in second ideas 2 and vehemently critiqued by the Europeans. And the starting point was Heidegger, his own student. They did not like the transcendental turn in Husserl. He was a leader without followers. Once he took the transcendental turn, started speaking about a transcendental subjectivity, and the pure consciousness, there was a lot of reaction, and he's brought back to naturalism. He was brought back to naturalism by Heidegger successfully, and the followers. Professor Bhagat is sitting there. He knows me on this particular subject. But Vedantins would be so happy to see Husserl speaking about the transcendental subjectivity, or when we will see how Sartre speaks about the empirical ego as outside the field of consciousness. Here is the problematic. The I, which we are talking about as Jiva Chaitanya, is located outside the field of consciousness for the Vedantins, for Sartre, for who? Not for Husserl, but for Sartre. The I is situated outside the field of consciousness for Shankara. The I is not within the field of consciousness at all. And the reflected intelligence in Antahkarana has given rise to a sense of subjectivity. As such, there is no subjectivity there. That's the beauty of it. The layered identities the I has acquired, it's the, if we can use the language of Husserl again, it's the magnetic pole, the subjective pole, which is acquiring all kinds of identities, and the solidification of these identities give a sense of self. As such, there is no self at all. Don't you see the resonance of the Buddhist Anatmavada there? That's what the whole thesis is. And J. Krishnamurti, looks more like a Buddhist speaking than a Vedanta. And J. Krishnamurti does not belong to any of the schools of Vedanta. A. B. He was against all authority, same a parallel thinker, fresh with new ideas and doing philosophy, distinct from the schools of philosophy. Anyone who does Indian philosophy, Professor Rajay is sitting here, you belong to a school if you do Indian philosophy, as simple as that. We belong to a school. We don't work in Indian philosophy as individuals, as you see the tendency in the Europeans or the Greeks. I simply belong to a school, and all the 3,000-year-old literature is owned by me. I don't have anything individual to, and what is done is they keep on supporting, or kind of arguing for their teachers' books. If a teacher has written a book, if Shankara has written a work on the Brahma Sutra, the students will, try to see that how they can strengthen with their own arguments, how they can, criticize the other schools of thought. A school of philosophy is what Indian philosophy is all about. You belong to a school. As simple as I generally say that I'm a Vedantin, I belong to the school of Vedanta. As simple as that. You don't do philosophy independently. But here is, at least in contemporary Indian philosophy, if you take Vivekananda Vedantin, Radhakrishnan Vedantin, Sri Aurobindo Vedanta became so predominant that it culminated in lesser research into Nyaya Vaisheshika, lesser research onto Sankhya Yoga philosophies. It has become so dominant a philosophy in the last 100 years. You take a name and literally they belong to Vedanta. Very few Buddhist scholars, and of course some Nayayikas, the Navya Nyaya school and other schools have been prominent as well. So, for the first time, you have in J. Krishnamurti someone who doesn't belong to a school of Indian philosophy, and somebody who speaks against authority, someone who is against Shabda Pramana, someone who critiques, the whole concept of a guru, of a text, of authority. You feel, really, enthused, and that's what attracted me, so situated in doing Vedanta philosophy, but that attracted me for a couple of decades. And if any of you youngsters are willing to travel to Chennai, Krishnamurti Foundation of India headquarters is in Chennai. They'll give you free accommodation, free food, and an international quality library right in the heart of Chennai. Greenways Road, I recommend. And they have centers in Brockwood Park in London, and then in Ohio, California. All these J. Krishnamurti centers you can use as a research scholar. So for the first time, you have a parallel philosophizing, not belonging to any of the. That itself is a departure. In Indian philosophy, we don't know that. We don't know that you don't belong to a school. You are either a Buddhist or you are doing Jaina, you are doing a Nayayika, you are a Purvamimamsaka. And here is Krishnamurti. You don't classify him a non-academic philosopher. but yet dealing with the problem. If you have to categorize him with any of the schools of philosophy, in Indian context, he looks more like a Buddhist who is arguing for the anatmata. But Akashi, the difference is, we will see that when we come to some of those slides. The difference is that as he holds on to anatma when the empirical ego is to be discussed. This is not part of this talk, but if you have to understand anatma, you have to understand the Buddhist schools with nuanced understandings that they have. But the common thesis of anatma is to be understood that the 5 skandhas and the 12 ayatanas and 72 or 68 dharmas, which give you a sense of an I, as such do not have anything essential about them. The essential nature, swabhavata, swabhavashunyata, the essential nature. 72 dharmas, I believe, is what I remember from Vasubandhu, and the 12 ayatanas and 5 skandhas, nama, rupa, vedana, vigna. And then, they support this thesis with pratitya samutpadata, dependent co-arising thesis, and then try and show that what all you understand as self, with its essential characteristic behavior, to put it in mildly. But the point is, Krishnamurti does all that. Krishnamurti's talks, if you follow commentaries on living, he is vehemently, speaking in favor of an anatmata. However, what is absent in Buddhist literature and philosophy, that there is some, apart from the anatma of the empirical, both Jivatma is anatma from the Vedantis, for God's sake, the young research scholars are listening. The Jivatma is anatma. So if the anatma vada of the Buddhists does not contradict the Vedanta at this level, at the empirical level, the Vedanta of Shankara, if it is Advaita, not Ramanuja, Bhaskara, but if you are talking about Shankara's Vedanta, it's as good as the Anatmavada of the Buddhism, in the sense that the Jivatma, which is denied of its permanent, eternal nature, is what is achieved by Shankara. It is Advaita. So that's how he was called the Prachanda Buddha. At this empirical level. However, what is available in Krishnamurti in Vedanta is there is another onlooker conscious field. I'm not using the word, it's not individual self, it's a field. Adhisthana is a field, and it does not have a singularity. That's a problem for me for this talk. I will explore it a little later. This Sakshi Chaitanya, which is available in a human existence, does not have a singularity about it. What is achieved? The individuation is achieved at the level of Jiva Chaitanya. You are achieving an individuation at the level of Jiva Chaitanya. Isn't it yes or no? I'm stout, I'm lean, I'm white, I'm X, I'm Z. You have achieved an individuation at the level of empirical ego. Yes or no? What is achieved? The singularity is achieved at the empirical level. Each Jiva thinks one is uniquely, destined with the unique, predicates, properties. All that is achieved by the Jiva Chaitanya. But the Sakshi Chaitanya, as you are speaking, the onlooker bird for the Vedantins and for Chairperson, this onlooker bird does not have the singularity about it. It's not individuated, and therefore it has access to universal truth. And I don't know if I'm sounding well for you, but it is here a dimension of human existence. Within human consciousness, there is an aspect which does not have singularity, and therefore it can access the universal truth. Its connectedness. A. B. It is collective. C. All those who do, what is that? Collective studies. Ontology, social ontology, etc. Krishnamurti. Husserl as well. Husserl also argues that there is a dimension of his Sakshi Chaitanya which he doesn't have the singularity. And that raises a significant question. Again, that's not part of my talk now. That raises a significant question. If there is no singularity in the Sakshi Chaitanya which is available to you, then this, whatever the states of mind that the Jivatma has, which are available, this onlooker consciousness, Sakshi Chaitanya is able enough to perceive, cognize your emotions, your anger, your jealousy of the Jivatma, and this does not have the singularity, then the states of your individual mind must also be available to the other. Am I making sense with this problem? Now comes, famously, the problem of the other minds. In the Western world, you have the problem of the other mind. How do you actually know that the other person? Through other arguments, they try to prove that minds exist. But not in the Vedanta and Chaitanya. They have much more subtle and much more significant way that they are arguing. There is, see, we are already, so many statements, as I said already, we are already contradicting naturalism, all reductionist approaches to consciousness, all the understandings of the modern great thinkers of the West in the area of philosophy of mind. We are already critiquing many of such positions by positing a thesis, which is a Krishnamurtian way of understanding. And hearing, being a sheer Buddhist kind of a thinker, aligns more with the existentialist Sartrean tones. You will find a couple of slides I will show how he matches with the Sartrean thinking. He's positing a availability of the sacred apart from the secular. By secular, if you understand an empirical ego with all its identities, with the dynamic evolution that it has, the Sakshi Chaitanya plus action is what a Jiva Chaitanya is. Sakshi Chaitanya plus aesthetic sense, a Jiva Chaitanya. Sakshi Chaitanya with plus the social fabric, Jiva Chaitanya. What is available to us is a Jiva Chaitanya. Isn't it an embodied self that you and I are? Which is time and space, which is bound by time and space constraints, which is physical, which is material. That's why you would come across several philosophers arguing that it's all physical. The whole world is physical, the big picture is physical, and consciousness is a byproduct of the material, chemical processes of the brain. That's how these conclusions come, because the analysis starts and ends with the Jiva Chaitanya. The whole analysis is within the grasp of the Jiva Chaitanya. You're not positing something, which is sacred, which does not have agency, which does not enjoy or does not have an enjoyer mode, or popularly, if you would call it, the aesthetic sense of existence, the aesthetic mode, Bhoktrutva, even Gnataka. Understanding, even understanding things or knowing things also, but that has a different structure of its own. So a subjectivity at the transcendental level, which is not singular anymore, which has a universalistic behavior, community behavior, and therefore it leads to problem of revisiting our understanding of human rationality itself. Again, if you posit such a thesis that there is a Sakshi Chaitanya which doesn't have singularity, without bothering you. Next slide. Next. Leave it. Next. Enough of Vedanta. Again, but we'll come back to this side. We'll go to Krishna. Yeah. Much better. Krishnamurti, if you want to have an introduction, at the age of 13, he was taken over by the Theosophical Society as he was playing on the beach. Theosophical Society significantly contributed to the beginnings of Indian philosophy in the 20th century. A significant contribution by the society, and it is sent into freedom for education, and all that. And until 86, he told birth to 6 decades, constantly in public talks, and he was the president of the Theosophical Society, and he, in 1976 or so, he abandons theosophy and then considers that any organization is not good for a healthy philosophizing. And then he leaves theosophy, comes out, and these things are routine, statements about how Krishnamurti was doing his philosophy, denying the notion of authority in religious matters, and each has to free mind from self-imposed. So what was refreshing about Krishnamurti's philosophy is that uh, his whole philosophizing doesn't have, it, see what happens is as we philosophize, sometimes there are theological, effects, and sometimes it looks more like spirituality, and sometimes it becomes without epistemic possibility available epistemically. You know, when you're doing, a very what you call as philosophy minus all these characteristics. And if you see Descartes, if you see others also, you would always see some kind of an influence of theology, some kind of an influence of, even what to speak of Indian philosophers. Indian philosophers, when they are talking about religion, when they are doing spirituality, and when they are doing philosophy, it becomes hard to delineate. They're crossing the borderlines which are true. But if you see Krishnamurti, he's well aware. He's well aware not to enter into religion, not to enter into spirituality, not to bring in theology, but, but to achieve a kind of a subjectivity, an aspect of this human existence, which is not material, which is not empirical, which is beyond, which is transcendental, trans-relational, trans-empirical. Achieving that kind of a subjectivity uh, looks more prominent in his next. And the methodology that is applied, uh, as such, as I said, doing philosophy, several research students are sitting here, uh, get hold of one methodology or another. Uh, Ramarao would keep on saying whenever I met him, Nataraju, there is nothing called a philosophy. There is only philosophizing. All that there is only philosophizing. There's no end product in philosophy. And that philosophizing meticulously on the kind of methodology that if you have. And in the absence of your grasp of a methodology, it turns out to be a kind of a stale, faceless repetition of history of ideas. That's what Adrasupally would say continuously, that you're doing only history of ideas, and you're not thinking on your feet. You're not continuously engaging with the problem. And engaging with the problem comes with with a knowledge of what the methodology is employed. The Nayayikas have a methodology of their own, the 14-step methodology that we deal in our classes. The Vedantists have a method of their own. And what to speak of analytic or phenomenological existential philosophy. They have a methodology, the nuances of which are well worked out. And that leads them, and his methodology, this is interesting methodology. That's what again, I want you to pay attention to what we're doing. Choiceless awareness as a method. We talk about a Drishti in Vedanta form, Bahya Drishti, Antar Drishti, trans Drishti. There is a change in the Drishti. And if that is achieved, it brings a huge change in your understanding of say consciousness, say life, etc. That's a thesis in Muslim. That's a thesis that you have in Krishnamurti. A change and then awareness of the very structures of consciousness. If you say structures of consciousness, you're not a Vedantin, mind you please. A Vedantin would never use a word structure of consciousness. For Vedantins, there is no structure in consciousness. Consciousness is as transparent as possible, without its internal structures, indefinable. But you're allowed to use the word structure of subjectivity, structure of consciousness when you're doing phenomenology, when you're doing existential. It's popular, it's there everywhere. Every turn of the page, the structure of intentionality. That's part of the literature. Choiceless awareness as a method is change in this drishti from Bhakya to Antara, and then choicelessness is achieved if I can introduce you to a thesis by Shankara, which is a critique of Jnana Karma Samachayavada. I don't want to load this lecture with all the words and concepts, but just to give it. But if you don't understand that model, you don't understand what choicelessness as a method is. A significant method Krishnamurti is philosophizing. Because you cannot make statements about Sakshi Chaitanya and leave the hall. End of the day, that is to be achieved, isn't it? You need to achieve the Sakshi Chaitanya. And how is it that to be achieved? You cannot just say that it is trans-empirical, trans-relational, and it is a ground, adhisthana. And that's more a sermon giving, and no philosophical world is ready to accept you with such statements. And how is to achieve that other bird, isn't it? Our whole story today has been from being a bird that is eating the bittersweet fruits, resulting in suffering and joy. And the journey is to travel to an onlooker, spectator bird, you know, which looks more secure and more stable in its body for a Vedanta. And that is achieved. Krishnamurti, the sacred is present at every page. In Buddhism, you would end with the anatma, and there is ambiguity as to the definitions on nirvana, what that state of affairs is. Can you equate that nirvana with what Krishnamurti is talking about? These are all lot of ambiguities, which let's leave it there. But in Krishnamurti, there is an emphatic way of putting it that there is a sacred when the empirical ego ends all its attachments or is beloved of all its identities. Am I making sense? When you can achieve bracketing, because all thinking is action, all meditation is action, all that we do is, considered as action. But how could an awareness be possible without turning into an action? And that's what Shankara was achieving in his critique of Jnana Karma Samuchaya in Shvetashvatara Upanishad. An awareness without the tinge of an action, because once you speak about an action, there is no end to it. There is a result, and that leads to another action, and that leads to another action. Achieving a Sakshi Chaitanya is impossible when karma is involved. That's what Shankara was doing with his critique of Jnana Karma Samuchaya. And that's what is choiceless, an awareness which is not an action. I will leave you there with all the ambiguities involved in these statements, but it's good. It's good to confuse you as much as possible and leave you there. But think about it. There is a significant, thinking involved when these thinkers are talking about an awareness which is not an action. And if it turns out to be an action, a thought, it will lead you always to something which is materialistic, which is physical, and which is within the coordinates of time and space. It can never lead you to something which is beyond time-space coordinates or which is not material. Impossible. since all our thinking is considered to be materialistic, the brain processes have to be understood as material. And end of the day, what all we would have, the conclusions will all be physical and materialistic, which will lead to naturalism, which will eventually lead to an understanding that all that exists is only physical, and consciousness as a byproduct of physical processes. That would lead to that. That's what they are challenging. They're actually trying to tell us that you need to achieve an awareness, a drishti, which does not involve an action, which does not involve a thought. Thought itself for them is physical, which does not involve thought, which does not involve action. Even meditation involves action. Even I will end it here. Some more 5 minutes, or I will already yet to come to start. Sometimes, as you stand in front of the mic at the podium, you think you are a big thinker, a big speaker, and start speaking all kinds of things, and lose track of what is to be said. Okay, I will leave you there with the methodology, with those comments, though actually that needs a lot of examination as to how could there be an awareness. Next, please. Here is the observed discussion that Krishnamurti is bringing in. The ending of time, the memories, experiences harden the self, the I, and surrounding the I, a me is created. Both give a false sense of self, which we have been talking about. A false sense of a hardened self is not available, and all that is available is layered identities, which one has accumulated through experiences, which are formed into memory. The evil for JK is the self which is divisive and separated. The ending of the empirical self, as I said, the empirical self that is available to us has achieved individuation, has achieved singularity, has achieved all the identities, and therefore invariably it has to lead to violence and division. That's its basis. It leads to division and violence only because it has achieved all the individuation, and that individuation and singularity is not available to the spectator ego, which is also available to the individual existence. And there is that existence, part of that existence, which has universalistic, nature about it, which is not individuated. And that's the thesis. Choiceless awareness ends the conflict between, builds into lives. Thought is divisive. It is time, action, and memory. Thought is all about time, about action, about memory, and then awareness that is not an action takes one closer to the truth. That's Krishnamurti for you. If you have time, please read corrected to start with First and Last Freedom. And one of the classics from Krishnamurti is Freedom from the Known. It's a small book, it's a classic. It has become, that was the one that he wrote, otherwise all others are all lectures compiled later on. If you find time, freedom from the known. Known in the sense of time and memory, and a freedom from that. And the other aspect of Krishnamurti is all that, the sacred or the Sakshi Chaitanya subjectivity which is available to us is all that is freedom. Freedom is integral to the subjectivity. Again, we are critiquing many philosophers who think that freedom is available within the materialistic, physicalist explanations. We critique many of them. John Searle is to name one. Daniel Dennett, the other gentleman. Krishnamurti is critiquing all those. Even Sartre does that, and Sartre never became a Communist Party member just because he said, in Marxist philosophy, freedom is not available. Freedom is not available. We will see that in the next slide. So freedom is the very core structure of the subjectivity, which is trans-empirical. That's all. There is no. Okay, that's good. Don't go back. We will leave this one more ahead. Otherwise, it will take a lot of time. Yeah, we'll just look at a few observations because there is close proximity the way Krishnamurti thinks and writes, and the way. Am I doing something wrong, or is it just? It's okay. Stay away. Yeah. Stay away from the empirical ego or Sakshi Chaitanya.
Mike.
Okay. Tea is available. So we'll end with this slide. And there is a lot many, but we'll just see a few more points and then see how Krishnamurti deals with this. And the transcendental field. These are three conclusions in. Please, again, the young research students were there. Please read Transcendence of Ego by Sartre. It's again a small booklet. Those who are working in existentialism terminology, a must. The kind of clarity of thought, the articulation are at their best in Sartre, obviously. The transcendental field, these are three conclusions, and this is quote, this is quote. I have not paraphrased, this is quote. The transcendental field, purified of all egological structure, recovers its former limpidity. In one sense, it is nothing, since all physical, psychophysical, and psychical objects, all truths, and all values are outside of it. Since the me, for its part, has ceased to be part of it. He's trying to, give us a sense that the I that we know is outside the field of pure consciousness. The transparent consciousness, the I has to be outside of it. The I is achieved in the world of objects, among the world of objects out there. And the I cannot be placed within the field of subjectivity that we know. From this point of view, my feelings and my states, my ego itself, cease to be my exclusive property. The transcendental sphere is a sphere of absolute existence, a sphere of pure spontaneities, which are never objects and which determine themselves to exist. But please don't misunderstand me as I mixed Vedanta with Sartre and Husserl. Please don't misunderstand that Sartre or Husserl are speaking the language of Vedanta. Never do that. The footnote is, they're a world apart. There are only, some semblance of similarities here and there. That one has to be very clear about. Please do not imagine that they're speaking in the same language. No. There are so many nuances where they differ. So one has to be careful. So long as the I remains a structure of consciousness, it will always remain possible to contrast the consciousness with its I on one hand and all other existence on the other. But if the I becomes transcendent to it, that's one of the very good arguments I have come across in existentialism. How the I is transcendent to the field of consciousness, which you call as Sakshi Chaitanya. But if the I becomes transcendent to it, it participates in all the world's vicissitudes. It is not an absolute. It did not create the universe. It falls like other existences under the epoche. As you perform the epoche, the bracketing, the famous phenomenological method, as you perform the epoche, the I falls. And the famous Some of the times I give this example of it's like a salt doll, a salt doll which you have created out of all the memories and accumulated over the years. As it enters the ocean of consciousness, it melts down. There is nothing, to really characterize that this is the empirical ego. End of the day, it melts down, and therefore, if I has to be transcendent to consciousness, since it participates in all the world's vicissitudes, it's not an absolute. It did not create. You would, if you know Shankara's Advaita thesis, that's what he achieves. End of the day, when he makes the statement that Jivo Brahmaevanapara, the Jiva melts away as such. As such, the Jiva is as good as the Anatma of the Buddhists. Not in Ramanuja, for God's sake. Not in Ramanuja. For Ramanuja, there is an I which is eternally existing. The I is not created because it has come in contact with the external world, but there is an I which is existing there for the eternality. Ashesha.
Chida
Vastu Sheshine.
Sheshashayine.
Sheshashayine.
Nirmalananta
Kalyane. So that Chida Vastu Vishishta, there the I is eternally existing. That's where he challenges Shankara. That's where he challenges Shankara on this particular point, saying that you are much influenced by the Buddhists and you have reduced the Jivatma, to an Anatma. You have been influenced by the Buddhists, but as such, the Upanishad standpoint, according to Ramanuja, is that the I is eternally existing, and consciousness is an adventitious attribute of the I, Agantuka. It's a property of the I. Consciousness and I are not one and the same in the philosophy of Ramanuja. But however, next. The world, this is the third point that Sartre makes in the transcendence of the ego, the world. The world did not create the me did not create the world. There are two objects for the absolute impersonal consciousness, and it is through that consciousness that they are linked back together. This absolute consciousness that is purified of I is no longer in any way a subject, nor is it a collection of representations. It's quite simply a precondition, an absolute source of existence. Sakshi Chaitanya as a precondition, as a source that unifies all the experiences over the vicissitudes of time. A precondition is what needs to be posited as a Sakshi Chaitanya in order that you can explain your everyday ego, empirical ego that we have. That's what both are trying to achieve. Next. Can we end here? We will, because it's already an hour. What do you think? Much more. The discussions will continue because it leads into several problematic areas as such. Once you come up with such a thesis, it can be challenged, critiqued, because it's a parallel thesis to many of the understandings that we have in the field of philosophy of mind, in analytic circles, and within the schools of Indian philosophy. There is no one philosophy available within Indian philosophy. There's so many, philosophic schools. Lost in just actually go to more lions. Yes. We started with 2 birds and 2 lions. Vedanta per se deals with 4 lions. No 2. We have put up with 2 egos as of now. There are 4 such subjectivities available at different layers of our existence. Then you have, the saguna aspect of subjectivity, and then the nirguna aspect of subjectivity, apart from the Sakshi Chaitanya and the Jiva Chaitanya, and then the lesser ego in the form of Vishaya Chaitanya, 5 lions. So the egological studies of Vedanta continue. Thank you. So when
sort of long presentation, nearly 75 minutes or so, by Professor Nataraju. So I'm sure that that there must be many curiosities, observations that you may want to put forward. So now, some open discussion.
Can I ask? Okay. Let me ask it. 7.
Some mic that might work.
So it's working now. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. You touched upon quite a lot in the Indian tradition and also such an excellent presentation. I just had one question from the one of the central point that you made is you talked about a field of consciousness which is not singular. Now, that would mean that not only is it singular, but access to that would mean that access to this field of consciousness would, which is not singular, would mean that on and also on virtue of this singular field having a relation to the empirical self, perhaps a place where the modes of thoughts are expressed or even stored. Uh, it would lead to not only direct access to knowledge, but would also lead to some of the, for the lack of better word, some spooky experiences such as premonition, etc. Because now you have kind of an access to a field of consciousness which is beyond of, and which particularly because it is not singular. So not individualized. Now, in Aurobindo's uh, there are these elements where there is a field, and therefore in Aurobindo's life also there are not so discussed kind of areas which are like he had some premonition abilities and all. However, he himself posits that we are better off not relying on these insights that dawn on you without a clearly graspable chain of reason. For such insights are always under the risk of getting tangled with the incomplete and imperfection of mind, which of course he posits that mind is, since incomplete, there is a further evolution that he talks of the supermind. So do you also find this problem that the unified field of consciousness, which is not singular, can though be asserted, but when one tries to kind of let's say acquire knowledge from that field, and there is a risk of that getting entangled in the imperfections of our mind, which is habitually for its functioning dependent on senses.
It's okay. Yeah, I mean, the question is significant in the sense those who do Indian philosophy. The one question which very often comes to them is, we are speaking about a Sakshi Chaitanya which is available to us, which does not have, which is not individuated, localized. Huh? Oh, okay. Stay away from. Okay. So if that's the question is, the question is, if that is the case, then why do we have a school of Advaita by Shankara, a school of Vishishta Advaita, and then other explanations? So many schools of philosophy. We should have been having one explanation. Are you grasping the question? If you're talking about, a Sakshi Chaitanya, and if it is available to us, Why do you have so many interpretations of the same experience of the conscious field? You have Shankara interpreting it in one way, and then you have Ramanuja, then you have Sri Aurobindo. It means there, there, there is some kind of a contamination as far as this access to this field is concerned. Or B, it could be because of the meaning dimension that we have, or the way you interpret, or the way we interpret the kind of experience. Uh, in Radhakrishna also, in one of the places, there is this discussion. And he also says that this access to Sakshi Chaitanya and then interpreting it to others, the question of crops up. So the use of language is not bereft of its own, construction of a reality. Language already has its own, a constructed reality of its own. So obviously, there would always be a scope that the residuum which is available to phenomenological reduction need not be pure all the time, quote unquote. It need not be. If there is all defilement because it is seen through the lens and is created through a language which is imperfect all the time. So, what to comment on Sri Aurobindo's statements? That obviously there's always this problem, ambiguity. The question is, why don't we have just one school of thought? If what you're speaking about is available to us, if there's a field of subjectivity which has universal behavior about itself, then all those who cognize of it must come up with the same interpretation. Why is there Advaita, Dvaita, Visheshta, Achintya, Veda, Veda? Why are there so many interpretations? So, obviously, there is that influence of that mind. That's what some of them say.
Two more. Okay.
Thank you, sir, for this great presentation. Just something like this question, only, if there is no dichotomy of knower, known, and knowledge in the state of Purna Chaitanya, if there is no time even, then how can observation be possible? And it is in the true sense observation, or it is the speculation of observation, because again you are saying that many interpretations are there. So this thing, and like when you are using the word transcendental eye, so transcendental eye even comes in even the Sanskrit of your region, and there it operates in time. The transcendental synthetic into a perception. That he is giving another term, noumenal eye. So I think Purna Chaitanya is near to noumenal eye, something not in transcendental eye. There is no time. So one other thing is that how does time come as a link? From how can we come to time?